to another episode of Adoption and Beyond. I'm Elise White, Social Service Program Manager at Adoptions from the Heart, and the co-host of this podcast.
And I'm Nicole Fowler, Director of Social Services at Adoptions from the Heart, and the other co-host of this podcast.
Today, we're thrilled to have a special guest joining us, Dr. Michael Stokes, a licensed professional counselor with a doctorate in professional counseling and supervision, the CEO of Stokes Counseling, and an adoptive father.
In this episode, we'll hear about Dr. Stokes' personal adoption story, his expertise on managing the emotional roller coaster of the wait, how families can cope with feelings during the holiday season, and the concept of duality in adoption. And I do want to say that I just watched your AFTH TV episode, and because we're adding pieces of it to our second education course for families who have adopted previously too. I'm excited to see you and meet you and talk to you more.
Awesome. Excited too.
Yes, so for our listeners, please grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we dive into this heartfelt and enlightening discussion with Dr. Michael Stokes. Michael, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
I'd love to just jump right in and hear a little bit about your personal story with adoption. What sort of inspired you to pursue adoption and start working with AFTH?
Yeah. So my husband and I talked about having kids early on in our relationship, and adoption was always something that we were pretty sure that that was going to be our journey to grow our family, and so timing was like really the variable for us. There's so much to consider, as we're sort of navigating our relationship, and from like housing to school system to finances, right? All of the dynamics. And so, we knew that we wanted to find, a local agency that like we could actually go and visit and like feel like it is a real agency, versus the sort of plethora of like options on Google. Um, and so, as we were looking for, an agency, we like really valued the transparency of Adoptions from the Heart, in terms of the information that they provided on the website, to, the info session, which was like really great to kind of break down all of that stuff. And so we did the info session, took about, I want to say like 8 or 9 months to like digest that because it was really overwhelming. And then came back for another info session to see what might have changed, right? And so we knew at that second time we were clearly ready, and so started the process from there.
Thank you. And your adoption process, without getting into too much detail, had a lot of twists and turns and unexpected things that were thrown your way, certainly. Was there anything that you would like to share that you just weren't expecting to happen and how you kind of navigated that, you and your husband?
Yeah. What's interesting is we adopted twice through the agency, and both of our adoptions were very different. We had very, very different experiences. So, our first adoption, we started the process in 2015-ish. At that point, we were expecting about a year to a year and a half wait was, really the expectation at that point. What was interesting is there were not a lot of gay couples who were live on the books. And so one of the pieces that our social worker at the time shared was, since there are not a lot of same sex families waiting, your wait may be a little bit sooner, because there's just not a lot of option. And so, we sort of took that for like whatever it's worth, and went through our sort of waiting process. And, I wouldn't say that that was a difficult process. We waited about like 9 months for our daughter, which, was interesting. Like, we did, I think, all of the right things, which was like not focus on the monthly updates. We were able to kind of just live in the moment and enjoy going on vacation and, all that good stuff. And so we were matched the beginning of 2016. And so at that point we were planning, we had our Vegas tickets in the cart, and really sort of living our best life. And so we got the call, and it sort of was a lot sooner than we expected. And so we were able to meet birth mom um before our daughter was born, which was like a really nerve-wracking experience. So we met her, and then about two weeks later we went to PA, where we were for about 3 weeks because there was some sort of issues around her like going into early labor, and then it turns out that she was actually not in labor. And so we just hung out in PA until, our daughter was born. And so, I sort of talk about that, adoption experience, as a whole being like a really magical experience, right? It sort of lined up with like, the 9 months. We were able to be present for like labor and delivery. It was such a great birth mom match. We have a totally open adoption with our daughter's mom, and we go there twice a year. So, I talk about that being sort of like, a magical, experience. And so we decided to do it again, knowing that we wanted 2 kids. And so we went into the second adoption with the expectation that it was going to take a little bit longer. So we had this like year and a half to 2 year expectation. And so we were sort of coasting along, and we endured all of the bumps in the road, all of this really scary things you guys talk about that, are a reality, was our reality at that point. So, disappointment to, disruption to, multiple matches that didn't work out for, various reasons, to, it being about 4 years before we were placed. And so that wait was really hard. And so, two totally different experiences, but yet, here I am, a family of four, with, the birth mom for our son, such a great match. Two, we have an open adoption. It's wonderful, wouldn't change it, but certainly, all of the scary stuff definitely came true.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm would love to hear a lot more about that, but also respect the privacy of everyone involved. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I know prospective adoptive parents, birth parents can learn so much from these conversations. And looking back on your journey, is there anything you wish you had known or done differently through all these challenges and joys?
Yeah, I think um I think probably taking my own advice and the advice of my social worker, of stop trying to control the process. And it's so hard. And so we hear that over and over again. As much as we, obsess about our key and like think about, all of the different levels of like openness that may sort of widen our chances of being matched, and like being able to be hyper obsessive about the monthly updates, right? All of that stuff, like looking back, that didn't help us get placed faster. And so if I were to do it differently, it would be to focus less on that, and focus more on the things that I can control, which is like being in the moment, right? Enjoying where I'm at. Right, enjoying being a family of three at that point, and taking advantage of those moments, and like when things got tough, being able to use my support system.
Absolutely. Michael, do you think that your experience as a counselor um, helped at all during your waiting process, or the things that you endured, disappointments, disruptions during your waiting time, do you think your background helped at all? Or is it kind of hard to, like you said, take your own advice, even though you know in your head what you're supposed to be doing and what might help you? You're not a counselor in that moment. You are a prospective adoptive father. And
Yeah.
how do things kind of line up for you?
100%. It did not help me at all. At the end of the day, we are human, right? And so, as much as I have a background in, really helping manage anxiety and, mindfulness and right, all of these like really key buzzwords that we hear a lot of, at the end of the day, like I'm a human in like a lived experience of something that was really hard. And so like managing that was difficult, right? And so yeah, I don't think that it certainly helped me. I think one of the pieces that like where it came to be a bit more positive was like I was more open to the idea of like expanding my support system and like being able to like identify of man, this is hard. And like I really need to like process my own stuff because I'm having a lot of anxiety around this, and like I need to see my own therapist. And I need to really be able to like get that support, and that's something that I talk to, whether it's on Facebook groups or whether that's with my patients or, friends that have, adopted or, are in the, adoption process is this is a really, really difficult process. And it brings up a lot of feelings that like you may not be thinking of or may not think that they exist, but that stuff is going to boil up to the surface. And being able to get a therapist who is an adoption competent therapist who can understand what you're going through is key. And so I encourage everybody in that process, right, in that adoption process to get that support. You're going to need it. And be proactive about that.
Wonderful advice. A reminder that despite any background, that we all can face this similar anxieties and challenges. Um, and I do want to talk more about like the holidays later, but for now, I think it's a good moment to bring up the duality and adoption, because we're talking about like the wait times too. But then when it comes time for placement or potential placement, post placement, there's a balance there too of joy for adoptive families, but also feeling the loss of biological families and what they may feel, and how what do you speak to the duality in adoption?
Yeah, I think it's something that you as an adoptive parent, um, and I think, and I could speak less to this because I'm not a birth parent, so I certainly never want to cross that line. But I imagine that there may be some overlap of you're gonna have to manage that for the rest of your life. Like it doesn't go away, right? And so, I think early on, like being able to find that balance of feeling feeling that joy, right? That like your family is complete in, holding this baby in your arms, yet having empathy and understanding that birth mom, birth parents, right, are also experiencing a level of grief. And um and they may be experiencing a level of joy, right, knowing that their baby is going to be placed with, adoptive parents that love and care about that child. And so just acknowledging that and being sensitive to it, I think is key. And understanding that like with that joy also comes grief, and that's in the post placement visits, that's on your child's birthday, that's on the multiple questions over the years of like, what is my story, where did I come from, who am I, who are you, why did you choose me, why did my birth parents not choose me? All of those difficult questions, you need to be prepared to enter the room with talking about joy and grief at the same time, because that is your child's reality.
Absolutely. And Michael, you bring up such great points. How do you all, because you have two pretty open adoptions just in your own home, how do you foster that relationship with birth parents or really honor the role that they play in your son and daughter's lives?
Yeah, we make it a priority to bring them in the conversation. So we talk about mom. We whether it's talking about mom in the context of my daughter who like has mom, stepdad and siblings, to my son that has birth mom. So being able to just sort of like factor them into the conversation, and like bring that up, and that could be during like story time of like, oh, I know that's mommy's favorite color, or oh, we did something like that during our visit, do you remember? Right, like being able to just normalize the conversation, so that when they do have questions, when they do have thoughts and feelings that come up, it becomes normalized, because mom and mommy are like part of our family. And so we just bring them up like we would bring up dad, daddy, grandma, cousins, right? And so sort of opening that up, and talking about it in times that are not heavy, right? In times that are not about those difficult questions, right? Where your gut sort of sinks when your child asks you a question randomly in the car on the way to Target, and you're like, where did this come from? Right? And you're like, I'm not prepped for this. It's important that you're talking about the child's birth family in these less heavy conversations, so that that becomes normalized for your child, but it also becomes normalized for you as the adoptive parent.
Yeah, such a great point to just be talking about birth parents on a regular basis. And the words you use, normalizing, like that's something that we try to get that point across all the time is it's going to be easier for you and your child if their birth family is brought into everyday conversation, right? Because just like you said, Michael, then you're not so surprised when they start asking these big questions that you don't realize that their tiny little minds have, right? Like these children are so smart and they ask you the craziest things at the craziest times. And if you're talking about it on a daily basis, it doesn't feel so hard when it comes to those more difficult conversations about history and things like that. It's now time for our What's Buzzing segment. Nicole, what do you have for us today?
Hey there, thanks, Elise. Today I have an article titled Dad Says He Has No Regrets About Putting One of His Twins Up for Adoption and Raising the Other One. And we'll link the article as well. I'm going to read a small segment from the article and I want to hear your thoughts on the situation. The couple didn't tell their families that they were expecting twins, nor did they disclose the truth after the birth. Um, it wasn't until late 2020, when the girls were 19, that Dawn and Clint, which are the birth parents, told Michaela that she had a twin sister. I said, "Do you remember how you wish that you had a sibling?" "Well, you do." Dawn recalled her conversation with Michaela. The discussion came after Dawn received a message from Birth Parent Finder, an agency that connects people with their biological relatives. Dawn and Clint agreed to meet the other twin, who was named Becky at birth and renamed Reagan. She said, "I had to stop myself from hugging her, even though I longed to. Instead, we just sat and talked. We answered the list of questions that Becky had prepared, all about us, our family health, and why we had put her up for adoption." The biological sisters later met for the first time since being separated at birth at a pizza parlor. Michaela also told the son that she holds no contempt towards her parents for placing her sister for adoption and keeping her existence a secret for 20 years. I didn't feel any anger towards mom and dad for keeping this from me. In fact, I listening to mom talk about it through the tears, I only felt sorry that she'd been through it. So a lot of unique circumstances there. So Elise, can you share some of your thoughts about this article and family?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is a lot of controversy with a topic like this where birth parents decide to place one sibling and parent another, especially when it's twins. We're not here to pass any judgment on any birth parent's decision to parent or place one child and parent another. What I will say is that for the sake of their daughter that they were parenting, I would have hoped that they would have shared with her the fact that she was a twin and that they had placed her twin with an adoptive family much sooner than 19 years old. Of course, I'm sure there were a lot of factors, that came into play when they made that decision. Um, I also just want to point out that they were using Reagan's birth name, given name that they had given her, Becky, throughout the whole conversation. But from our standpoint, I'd really like to refer to her as Reagan because that is her name. So, when we think about Reagan and her story, and part of what we didn't discuss in this article was that Reagan ultimately decided that she did not want to have a relationship with her birth parents and birth sister after the first few meetings that they had. And I think that that's okay. I think that's really hard to come to terms with as her birth family. Um, I know that in the article it talks a lot about how distraught they were over that decision, but I think that they made the decision to place, and so she should have, the right to choose whether she ultimately wants a relationship or not. Sounds like it was very painful for her, that meeting and not knowing them for so long. So I just want to make sure we don't pass judgment on a situation like this. Nicole, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Think that was so well said, and I agree completely. And twins and siblings, there are options, of course, and the one thing that I will say too is that there's a reason that we believe in openness and adoption here at Adoptions from the Heart, but we don't force that onto biological parents if they're going through too much grief or not ready for that. That's okay. There is a way for adoptive parents to keep an open heart and an openness in adoption without it necessarily being an open adoption with the birth family, and being able to have that information. Maybe would have changed things, maybe not. I think there's so many circumstances that happen over 20 years, so we can't say what could have been done differently, but that's why we believe in what we believe in here. It's a tough read. It was a tough read for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure for our listeners, everyone has a different opinion on a situation like this. But unless we're in their shoes, we don't know the myriad of reasons why they may have made the decisions that they made. And so ultimately, all we hope is that everyone in that triad is at peace with, the way things played out.
Sure.
Um, like Nicole brought up a few minutes ago, we're gearing up for all of the holidays. It's an exciting time for a lot of people. It can also bring up a lot of grief and a lot of loss, both for adoptive families and birth families. Do you have any suggestions for sort of navigating that time and the different feelings people may be having?
Yeah, sure. I think, it's important that we as, adoptive parents gut check our feelings and like make sure that we are like taking care of those that are separate from our child, right? Like we need to access our support system to like make sure that we have the appropriate outlet to process those, and that when the holidays come, that we are better prepared for having those conversations with our children and being able to bring up birth parents during the holiday season, um, because if you're not bringing it up, your child may be bringing it up, right? And so I think in those times being able to just check in with your child, right? Again, sort of like monitoring age appropriateness, and being able to make sure that you're going to open the door for that conversation if the door is not already open. But certainly acknowledging, like, it's hard to, it's been a while since we saw mommy, right? And maybe talking about when our next visit is, would be something that I would do with my kiddos. Typically, over the last, COVID has been harder to, make those visits. Prior, we would always go around like this time, right? December-ish. And we haven't over the last couple of years because of COVID and then schedules and all that other stuff. So we sort of map that out in different times. But being able to just check in with our kiddos, I think is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about it from an adoptive parent perspective as well, before you were placed with your children, could the holiday time be difficult on you? And for other prospective adoptive parents and people waiting to be placed, why might the holidays be difficult and how can they manage those expectations going into family time?
Yeah, I think, family time often like triggers this like feeling of, your wants and desires. And typically, if you're in the waiting process, you want to expand your family, right? And so it is a reminder, whether that is, sort of directly by seeing family and having them ask you of like, oh, hey, did you hear anything? How's that adoption process? Man, it's been a long time, right? All of those things that we just dread are like nails on a chalkboard. Um, to like managing that, and then also our own internal feelings of like being able to watch our families and like see whether it's our own sisters or brothers, expanding their families and like seeing little kiddos running around and like wanting that for us, right? So, again, I think it's being prepared that like that is a normal reaction that is going to come up for you, and again being able to access your support system, right? And so like being able to put in those boundaries with your family if those questions really are so hard for you that they make you uncomfortable, it is okay to say to your family like, look, I'm still in the process. I don't want to talk about it right now. And like that's okay. You don't have to have a reason. You don't have to like justify the reason. You could just put a period at the end of that sentence and move on, right? Like let's talk about like let's talk about other things, right? Let's talk about dinner. Let's talk about dessert. Let's talk about the weather, but please let's not talk about the adoption process.
For sure. And it sounds like loved ones and support systems can bring up this conversation to adoptive parents, prospective adoptive parents. How can I support you? Do you want to talk about it? Do you not? When you're ready to talk about it, if you're ready, I'm here to listen, and learn more, because we know prospective adoptive parents have been through so much education and learning and preparing for such a unknown situation that's going to come up. So I appreciate the boundaries, but also loved ones and supportive people, just offer that for prospective adoptive parents to let you know when they're ready to discuss it. Um, for anyone struggling with feelings of maybe isolation or longing during the holiday season, whether that's any member of the adoption triad, what are some actionable ways to create moments of peace and connection?
Yeah. I think finding those moments of joy in your life, right? Being able to find those people that you feel connected with. And so for, a lot of people, that may not be your family, right? They may not be, though that may not be mom and dad and brother, sister, cousins. That may be friends, neighbors, co-workers. I encourage you to connect with them. And it doesn't have to be, hey, I'm struggling about adoption in any capacity. That doesn't need to be the conversation. That could be like, hey, I really want to hang out with you. I really want to spend time with you. I really want to watch a movie with you, right? It doesn't have to be centered around, I'm struggling with this adoption thing. And so, knowing you can foster and create that and, surrounding yourself with other people. And I think it's also, if you are a birth parent, connecting to your social worker. Like, are there other birth parents in my area or like other folks that I could connect with that like understand what is happening, right? That have lived experience, or if you're, an adoptive parent, being able to access the supports and being able to reach out to your social worker and say, what are the supports? Who do I reach out to? Right. So like being able to just be proactive about that, I think is key, but also using the people in your life, I think is really important.
Michael, you talk a lot about these action steps that people can take, and I'd love to know, just pedaling a little bit, thinking about your second adoption and that it was a lengthy wait, especially compared to your first. What were some things that you and your husband did during the wait time that you felt particularly were helpful to you in that period? Like, I know you talked about still going on vacation and things like that. Like, what were some things that maybe could help other people during the wait that are really struggling with that length of time and that uncertainty and all those unknowns during that time?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the pieces that I found to be really helpful was, connecting with other people waiting. And so, Adoptions from the Heart does have a closed Facebook group that I think everybody should join and really gain support. I have met a lot of wonderful people that I still am connected with, and we share pictures of our kiddos and over the years. But I think that is a really great resource just to get connected with other people who are in the process. And I think another piece is like being able to connect with a therapist. I can't sort of like stress that enough, because I think it is a resource that, a lot of people connect with. Um, uh, you know, that they must have some sort of mental health crisis, or there must be some sort of emergency issue to connect with, a therapist. And like struggling with the weight, struggling with adoption and, the triad or any piece of that is justification to say I need a therapist, right? Like you deserve to have support. And so somebody who is not your partner, not your family, somebody totally objective who can hear you, support you and understand you, I think is key to, being able to help manage the weight. And again, sort of staying present, right? As I talked about, being able to find those moments of joy and not hyper focus on some of the like metrics that the agency provides that are supposed to be helpful, but like certainly not a measure of like, am I like a step closer to being matched, right? Which like I think we interpret it, right, as, prospective adoptive parents. We like interpret that as, a metric that we're going to follow and sort of do an analysis to say we're 80% there. That's not the purpose. And so, going back to, gaining support, being able to connect with other people who get it, I think is really, really important.
This has all been such wonderful information, and I believe in therapy for all, for everybody. I think that's wonderful. Any sort of counseling from an outside perspective. Thinking about prospective adoptive families that haven't adopted yet. And so we want to acknowledge, grief that we may be feeling, loss that we may be feeling, especially in certain times or seasons. But also, I feel like families want to be prepared for the future conversations with their children that are universally going to be come up through adoptees, and we hope that they feel confident enough to ask those questions on the way to Target and everything without catastrophizing or future tripping too much. How can families prepare themselves for those conversations now?
I think as long as you commit to being honest, transparent, and age appropriate with your child, there is not a wrong answer. And there is also not a way to prepare yourself 100% for those conversations. They are going to come up when you least expect it. And um and if you over rehearse what you're going to say, your child knows you. They know when you're getting nervous. They know when you're BSing them, right? Like they are smart little humans. We don't give them enough credit, right? And so if you're like over explaining, if you're talking too much, right? Like you're going to confuse them. The goal is to answer the question. The the goal is not to ramble and provide a whole bunch of information that is going to elicit seven more questions, right? So we want to be clear, concise, and age appropriate. I think that's key. But like, I don't think that there is a particular formula to to prepare yourself for those conversations, um, other than committing to what are the values you're going to bring into those conversations. And then based on the values you're going to bring in those conversations, you're going to be able to answer that. So when they ask you, where did I come from? Right? Like, how did I get here? Or did I come out of your belly? You're going to be prepared for those conversations, and you're not going to launch into a biology lesson. You're going to answer that based on their age and based on what the question is, and then move on.
Yeah, I love that you say just answer their question because you're so right, Michael. I think sometimes as adults we analyze, right? Like, oh, what do they really mean by this question? And there's usually not hidden meanings with children. They're
Never.
just wanting a black and white answer and they want to then move on. And we're internalizing things and overthinking things. So I think that's such great advice for anybody parenting a child in any type of role. Absolutely. Um, and Michael, I really love, just the theme of today that you've been talking about is finding a community, right? Like it's just so important to find a community. And for anyone in our program listening, we have, a waiting family support group, a post-placement support group. Like those are great places to go. The Facebook group that you mentioned is a great place to go. But fostering that community, I think the adoption community is larger than most people realize until they enter it, right? And there's just so many outlets for people. Um, I'd love to know, we've talked about so much today. If you just have parting thoughts or things you'd like to touch on for anyone listening, any member of the adoption triad or anyone thinking about being a member of the triad.
Yeah. I think we covered a lot of like really important pieces. I think for any of those folks who are struggling to understand the duality of adoption around grief and loss and joy, I like really encourage you to reach out to your social worker. Like I think that is such an important piece, and like it is okay if you don't get it. What's not okay is that you don't get it and you refuse to do the work around it. Like that is not okay. And that is going to be harmful for your child. So, acknowledging that uh, that you don't get it, or perhaps you want to understand it better, is a way for you to educate yourself on what's happening, because that is going to be such an important piece through this journey. Um, and I'd say the sort of other piece to sort of highlight of what we talked about is, the agency is constantly working behind the scenes of working with birth parents, um, in many different situations. And like one of the things that I always value about the agency is like really helping birth moms explore all of their options. Like it's not about how do I convince you to place your child, but like what do you need to make that decision? Whatever that decision is. And like that's something that like is so important to me. And like one of the things of like why I continue to stay connected to the agency is for that very reason. And respecting and acknowledging a birth mom's journey is so important. So, you know, being able to stay present and not hyper focus on the wait time and know that the agency is working behind the scenes to do their job. And like that is going to happen because there's so many variables that are at play. We are dealing with humans, right? And so, there is not this process that can guarantee you'll be matched in 12 months. And if you find an agency that says that to you, I really want you to run the other way because that is a highly unethical agency, right? And so um being able to just um focus on the things around you, things that you can control, because this process is one that you can't. And it really will set you up for parenting, because there's so many things in parenting that you can't control. So, like, I think it's a really good lesson. At least my sort of biggest takeaway is like I've learned to be patient through this process, as well as the like journey to be a father. Like that is a common thread. And so if you're not a patient person, like I was not a patient person before this, that this is a good teaching tool. So like know that that's your own stuff that you're going to manage, and like you're doing your best.
Yeah, such great words of wisdom. You can tell you've adopted twice and have gone through every situation you could think of, because you're so right. Like everything you talk about are common themes for everybody going through this process that everybody would be able to relate to. And we just thank you so much for being open with us about these conversations, because it's important for our listeners to hear from somebody that's been through this process and the things that were hard for them that are universal, and the things that really helps them that can be universal as well. And it's just, it was an important conversation. And we thank you so much for being here and vulnerable with us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Hearing from you, I learned so much in many different areas of my personal and professional life. This has been wonderful. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Nicole, what a great conversation we had with Michael. What are some of your parting thoughts from this episode?
I thought it was wonderful in so many different ideas and ways to support and ways to handle grief and all of that through the holidays. And I think, but just as Michael described, hindsight is 2020. So I think that perspective, adoptive parents can take what they can use. And if it's something that's not helpful to you, you move forward, just like with your support systems through the holidays. And I'm wishing everybody holidays full of support and comfort, even in grief, all members of the adoption triad. And I encourage anybody to reach out to their community, to Adoptions from the Heart, if you're struggling. Elise, what about you? What is your parting thought for this episode?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Nicole. Like just this thought of building our communities, right? Which is so important when you are going through the adoption process, whether you are a prospective adoptive parent or whether you're going through the process as a potential birth parent as well. Building that community is so important, and then helping build that community for our children as well, so that we have people that can relate to our experiences, which is always so helpful. But also B, so that you have people to lean on and during the difficult times. And we talked a lot about grief and loss, and that's universal for every member of the adoption triad. And having that community, whether it's your family, whether it's friends, whether it's new people you meet through this process or support groups, that's just so beneficial for everybody, especially during the holidays and times that can be a little bit harder for individuals.
All right, Elise, that wraps up this episode of Adoption and Beyond, the last of 2024 for us. We really hope that everyone found today's conversation helpful and insightful. Dr. Michael Stokes, it was so wonderful to have him, and we hope everybody loved it as much as we did.
Absolutely. If you are an adoptive parent or a birth parent seeking support, please remember there's help and resources available to guide you through every step of your journey.
A huge thank you to Dr. Stokes for sharing his personal story and professional expertise. And thank you to our listeners for joining us.
Please be sure to subscribe to Adoption and Beyond so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, we'd love if you left a review or shared this episode with a friend.
Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to connecting with you all at our next episode. Please like, subscribe, all of the things. We look forward to talking to you again soon.
Happy holidays.